Ever feel like you're thrown into the deep end? No warning, no life vest, just wham!
Ooh, I can imagine.
Today, we're diving into the life of someone who faced exactly that. And not just anyone, a queen. Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz,
Yeah.
who became Queen Charlotte of Great Britain and Ireland, 1761.
Wow.
Imagine being plucked from your family, shipped to a foreign country where you don't know the language, and within hours, married to the king.
It does sound like something out of a historical novel, but that was her reality.
It was, and it's fascinating how she dealt with it, this whirlwind beginning, and went on to leave such a mark on England.
It really is.
Let's start with that wild journey, Germany to England. Not exactly a relaxing honeymoon cruise.
No, not at all. Her voyage started in August of 1761 and was just hammered by storms, delayed her arrival.
Oh, no.
Finally, September 8th, she lands in England. Can you imagine the nerves, the anticipation, the exhaustion after a trip like that?
And on top of everything, she didn't speak any English, stepping into a completely new world.
Absolutely. But here's what's even more unbelievable. The wedding wasn't just rushed, it was hours after she landed.
Hours? Are you serious? I'd need like a week to prepare for something like that, let alone adjust to a new country and meet my future husband.
It is mind-boggling how fast it all happened. Arrived at St. James Palace, met King George III for the first time, then whisked away to get ready for the wedding.
Wow.
Received the king's gifts, jewels, that famous silver wedding gown, probably still feeling seasick.
And that gown is incredibly elaborate, right?
Right.
I read about the silver embroidery, the purple velvet, the diamonds. Sounds more like something in a museum than a wedding dress.
Oh, it was a full-on display of royal opulence, meant to show off the wealth and power of the monarchy. But practicality-wise, it was supposedly the hottest day of the year.
Oh my gosh.
Imagine all that finery in that heat.
I can relate to that. I remember my own summer wedding. Just a simple dress felt like too much,
Yeah.
but she had layers of heavy fabric, jewels. No wonder there are stories of her trembling, getting ready to walk down the aisle.
There is this one story about the Duke of York. Seeing her like that, he takes her hand and whispers, "Courage, princess."
Wow.
Says so much about the pressure she must have been under, the weight of it all.
All this, and she couldn't even talk to anyone. It's amazing. But you mentioned earlier this marriage, as rushed and crazy as it was, it actually turned out to be happy.
It seems that way, from what we know. George III was smitten with her right from the start, called her a treasure, supposedly was so in love with her portrait he refused to let anyone else see it.
That sounds a bit possessive.
Well, there's more to it. George III had a deep distrust of the court. All the scheming, he'd seen the scandals, the betrayals of his predecessors, and wanted to protect Charlotte from that.
I see.
He wanted to keep her, in his words, under his own training.
So protecting her by isolating her.
In a way, yes. He thought limiting her interactions would keep her safe from the dangers of court life. Even worried about her friendships, warned her about party and its effect on women, especially royal ones.
Sounds like a tricky balance, protective and controlling. But despite all that, they genuinely liked being together, right?
That's the impression we get. Shared a love of the arts, especially music and dancing.
I read that George III would throw balls just so they could dance together. Kind of romantic in a grand royal way.
It is, and they would play music together privately. She played the harpsichord and sang George on the flute. Big theater fans too. Much Ado About Nothing was the first play they saw as a couple.
So even with his controlling side, they found common ground. And then there's that incredible family, 15 children, whole royal dynasty right there.
Indeed. And Charlotte was, by all accounts, a very involved mother, especially with her daughter's education, made sure they had a well-rounded education. Not typical for girls back then. She even supported a young Mozart when he was only 8 years old.
Mozart, wow. Speaks to her own love of music and wanting to nurture young talent. So a queen, mother of 15, patron of the arts, that's a full plate.
It definitely was, and this is all before we even get to the tough times ahead, especially with King George's illness. But before we go there, what are your first impressions of Queen Charlotte? What stands out to you from all of this?
It's her resilience that strikes me. Just picture it, thrown into this unfamiliar, demanding world, the weight of a whole nation on your shoulders. It's amazing how she adapted, found her place, even moments of happiness amidst all that pressure.
You got it. That resilience, that strength, it's a key part of her story. And it becomes even more important as we move into the next chapter. And that resilience, that strength, it really becomes crucial as we go on to the next part of her life.
You mentioned that. It's where the fairy tale starts to get a little darker, isn't it?
It does. And it begins creeping in a few years after they marry, 1765, with the onset of George III's illness.
This wasn't just a cold, right? We're talking about a serious mental health crisis. Must have been terrifying, completely confusing at the time.
Oh, absolutely. His illness had so many different symptoms: paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, even physical problems. And this is the 1700s. Mental illness wasn't well understood, huge stigma around it.
So not only was she dealing with the fear, the uncertainty of her husband's condition, but also this pressure to keep up appearances for the monarchy.
Exactly. And then add to that the possibility of becoming regent.
Right.
When George III first got sick, there was a lot of talk who would rule if he couldn't. The Minority of Heir to the Crown Act of 1765 actually named Charlotte regent-elect.
Wow, that's a massive responsibility for someone still new to the country in all its ways.
No.
No wonder there are accounts of her being overpowered with some secret terror, like one lady-in-waiting said.
That really paints the picture, doesn't it? The fear, the helplessness in the royal household, and she was pretty much alone in it. Remember George III's distrust of the court? That included her own circle.
Oh, right.
She couldn't even confide in her closest friends.
That's a chilling thought. A private and public crisis at the same time, and no one to turn to. But didn't he recover from that first episode?
He did, but unfortunately it was just the beginning. The illness would keep coming back, each time taking a bigger toll on both of them.
And to make things worse, there was this strained relationship with their oldest son, the Prince of Wales.
Oh, yes, the Prince of Wales. Let's just say a complex character, known for his lavish lifestyle, his political ambitions, and his clashes with his father.
So on top of a sick husband, she's caught in a power struggle within her own family. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was a delicate situation, to say the least. The prince saw his father's illness as a chance to grab power, which put him at odds with Charlotte, fiercely protective of her husband and her position as potential regent.
It's incredible that she managed to handle all of that without falling apart.
Mm.
But even with the drama and heartbreak, she never neglected her duties, especially as a mother.
No, absolutely not. She was very much involved in raising all 15 children, her daughters especially, insisted on giving them a broad education, not the norm for young ladies back then.
It does show her progressive views on education. She wasn't just preparing them for court life. She wanted them to be smart, capable women.
Exactly. And that love of learning, it wasn't just for her kids. She was a known patron of the arts and sciences, had a huge library at Buckingham House, books on all kinds of topics.
So different from the image we often get, the frivolous, fashion-obsessed queen. This was a woman with real intellect, real curiosity.
Absolutely. And she was a pioneer in many ways,
Yeah.
deeply involved in charity work, healthcare especially. In fact, she founded a hospital for expectant mothers that's still running today, Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital.
Wow, her legacy goes way beyond the palace walls. It's inspiring to see how she used her position to help those in need.
It is. But there's another part of her legacy that's caused quite a stir in recent years. The theory about her possibly having African ancestry.
Right, the mystery of Queen Charlotte's heritage. It has captured people's imaginations, shows like Bridgerton bringing it to light. But what's the actual evidence?
Well, a few things fuel the debate. Most notably, a portrait of her by Alan Ramsay, the royal painter. Some historians think the portrait shows features suggestive of African ancestry.
I've seen it. It's definitely started conversations. But is there anything stronger than just visual interpretation?
That's where it gets tricky. Some point to written descriptions of Charlotte. They mention a darker complexion. But those descriptions are often subjective, open to different interpretations.
And there's the family tree connection, right? Something about a distant ancestor with Moorish heritage.
Yes, some historians have traced her lineage back to a Portuguese noblewoman in the 1400s. She was descended from a Moorish ruler, but it's many generations back, hard to definitively prove.
So it's still a mystery, a fascinating possibility. But even without a clear answer on her ancestry, her impact on England is clear. A devoted mother, a patron of the arts, a pioneer in healthcare, a woman who faced incredible challenges with grace and determination.
Very well said.
Mm.
And as we get into the final chapter of her life, we see those qualities shine through, even as she faces personal losses and her own health declining. Those qualities really do shine through as we get into the last part of her life, even as she faces personal losses and her own health declining.
It's amazing, isn't it? Even with all the turmoil with George III's illness and the politics, she still found comfort in her passions.
Mhm.
You mentioned her love of botany. Was she like a serious gardener.
Oh, more than that, she was a full-blown botanical enthusiast. In the late 1780s, when the king's health was going downhill, she really got into expanding the gardens at Kew.
Kew Gardens.
Yeah, exotic plants, new species, the whole works. She even had a part in creating what is now the largest botanical collection in the world.
Wow. It's fascinating how she used things like that, botany, her support of the arts, as a way to cope, almost like finding peace in the middle of chaos.
It does show her resilience, her ability to find joy even in those dark times. And even though she tried to stay out of politics, her influence was there, especially when it came to matters of the heart.
You're talking about the royal weddings she set up.
Exactly. She really got into matchmaking in her later years, especially for her children. She was very close with her eldest daughter, Elizabeth, very involved in planning her wedding. And then there was her granddaughter, Princess Charlotte.
Oh, Princess Charlotte. Such a sad story. But before we go there, what about her relationship with her own kids? We know she was devoted, but with 15 of them, there must have been favorites.
Well, from what we know, she was close to all of them, but she did have especially strong bonds with some. Elizabeth, like I said, was her confidant. And she had a soft spot for her youngest, Adolphus. He was quite a charmer, apparently.
What about the Prince of Wales? That seems like it would be a tough one with all the power struggles they went through.
Oh, it was definitely complicated, lots of disagreements. But even with his lifestyle, his choices causing her worry, she was still his mother. Offered guidance and support whenever she could. It really shows her dedication, her ability to forgive.
Sounds like she was a master of diplomacy, even in her own family. But back to Princess Charlotte. Her story is truly heartbreaking.
It really is. Charlotte, the king and queen's only legitimate granddaughter, she was adored by the public, seen as a symbol of hope for the future of the monarchy. But tragically, she died in childbirth in 1817, just 21 years old.
It's hard to imagine the grief Queen Charlotte must have felt, losing her granddaughter so young, and she herself was already in declining health.
It was a terrible loss, and it happened while she was battling dropsy, a condition that caused fluid buildup in her chest. Her last public appearance was in April of 1818, and by November that year, she was gone.
So just a year after her granddaughter.
Yes, at 74 years old. And what's really sad is that King George III, by then lost in his illness, was never told about her death.
That's so sad. A lifetime together, so much shared, and he wasn't even aware. It really highlights the devastating impact of mental illness, not just on the person, but on everyone around them.
It really does. But even with all the personal tragedy she faced, her legacy remains.
Absolutely. She was more than just a queen. She was a mother, a scholar, a patron of the arts, a pioneer in healthcare, a woman who navigated some of the toughest circumstances imaginable with such grace and resilience.
Her life was a fascinating mix of personal and political drama, all happening during a time of great change in the world. And while some parts of her story are still a mystery, like her ancestry, there's no denying her impact on England and its history.
I think what really strikes me is her commitment to her family and her people, even through heartbreak and political turmoil. She was a woman of incredible strength and compassion.
And she inspires us all. Her story shows us that even when things seem impossible, we can be resilient, we can be kind, we can make a difference. Queen Charlotte might be a figure from the past, but her story still speaks to us today.
It does, for sure. And for our listeners who want to learn more, I encourage you to explore Queen Charlotte, the Hanoverian dynasty, that whole fascinating period of British history.
As you do, keep in mind, history isn't just dates and names. It's about understanding real people, their joys and struggles, what they hoped for, what they dreamed of. Queen Charlotte's story deserves to be told, and I hope our deep dive today has inspired you to discover more.